who came later, and those who came later made their way impossible. How to live as your ancestors always had lived, in a country suddenly filled with carbines and covered wagons and brick buildings and stagecoaches, alongside forts become settlements, and settlements become towns, and towns become cities. If it was difficult for Native Americans to live then as their ancestors had, how much more difficult must it be now, with a pavement seeming as endless as the prairies once were? We thought we would ask that question now that a new National Museum of the American Indian has been established in New York City. On Native Ground is our cover story this morning. It is reported now by Martha Teichner.
My name is Abe Conklin. My Indian name is Nikawasa, which means bear man. I'm with the Osage and Ponca tribe of Oklahoma.
In a church basement outside Chicago, Abe Conklin sheds the trappings of modern mainstream America and prepares for the dance of his ancestors.
I've always remembered what one of our old chiefs said. He said, "There's a flood coming." He said, "Be prepared. Learn to swim in this flood." So that's what we had to do.
The flood was the white man, and Abe Conklin was determined that Bear Man would not drown. With a foot on two paths, that's how Abe Conklin and other Native Americans have survived in the white man's world, but retained their own identity. All roads are good, something Abe was taught as a child, is the name of the first exhibit at the new National Museum of the American Indian in New York City. This is the first of what will eventually be 3 branches of the museum. The biggest is to open in the year 2001, next to the Capitol in Washington, D.C.
And each one of these rings that are on the bear hat represent one potlatch.
The fact that this collection exists at all and is now part of the Smithsonian Institution is one of the ironies that resulted from the exploitation of American Indians. For more than 50 years, George Gustav Heye, a wealthy New York banker, bought Indian artifacts, literally by the boxcar, over 1 million of them. Most ended up in this warehouse.
Well, here is the pottery collection, or a good deal of it. And,
to Richard West, director of the museum, a Cheyenne himself, that was a mixed blessing. The objects were saved as tribal life disintegrated, but at a price.
This material, for the best of intentions in some cases, had been removed from the native communities who had made it in the first instance, and a part of whose lives it had been, and it was gone.
For American Indians, to reconnect with the past is to reconnect with the land. Out of the land comes life itself. In turn, life is invested in every object, every work of art. This spiritual relationship is at the heart of Indian culture.
I always pray. That's the way it was taught to me. We ask permission from our ancestors. I asked my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers to come and be with me and to help me have a good harvest.
It is long willow shoots that Pomo basket maker Susan Billy is cutting. In the hills of Northern California, this was a traditional gathering place long before a highway divided it, and before the day Susan and a friend found that road crews had been through.
And we came, and it was absolutely clear-cut back to those trees. And I just stood here and cried.
The willows are a metaphor for the difficulties Susan and other Indians have trying to preserve their heritage in a non-Indian world.
For one thing, I mean, this is totally destroyed for any kind of harvest now, although because
Susan Billy is torn. She's a single mother, and to make a living, she runs a bead shop in Ukiah, California.
I have semi-precious stone beads and glass, metal. Sometimes it takes years to make a basket. See, I can't abandon the other things I'm involved in. This is something that I really struggle with. When I look at a basket, I look at a number of...
Susan was one of the 23 Native Americans asked to choose objects from the Heye collection for the new museum. Like all the other selectors, she was overwhelmed.
Once I began to handle objects, they got bigger in my hands, almost, you know? I mean, you could feel it. They became more alive as anything that you touch.
Susan Billy recovered her Indianness through art. The Mashantucket Pequots of Connecticut did it through money. On the verge of extinction a few years ago, gambling has allowed them to be reborn. Last month they gave $10 million toward the new Indian Museum complex. It was the largest gift in Smithsonian history. How times have changed. Reduced to a cynical museum piece, the old Indian school where Native American culture was systematically obliterated. At the Santa Fe Indian School today, the opposite. Native life and language are taught alongside English.
That's their job, that's their responsibility.
Our elders are there to teach us when we do not know, to guide us when we are lost.
For Kim Cisneros and her generation, it is natural to live with a foot in both worlds.
But we have to be willing to learn from them.
But home is here, on the Santa Clara Pueblo.
Oh, it's a wonderful place to grow up.
It is Rena Swensel's spiritual home. She, too, was one of the selectors for the Indian Museum. She no longer lives at Santa Clara, but comes back often.
We knew where we belonged. We had a real strong sense of place. And it wasn't just in terms of the people, it was also in terms of the mountains and the hills that we grew up in.
So strong is the need to reconnect with Native culture and values that many Indians are coming back to the reservations. Marie Suazo quit her office job on the outside to make pottery full-time.
And you say you like the polishing best?
Yeah.
Why?
It shows that it's happy.
So the shine of the pot is the happiness?
Happiness.
The pot will sell for $1,200. The money means her art can be passed on to her children. But the idea of preserving Indian culture by selling it disturbs Rena Swensel.
I think the biggest thing is to remember those clouds again. And to remember where the source of the wind is, where the source of our breath is. And that source, I think that source becomes less the more we watch television, the more we sell our pots.
The objects Rena and the other selectors chose for the museum are intended to serve as a touchstone for Native Americans. But in fact, they will be seen mainly by non-Indians. Museum Director Richard West.
What I think ultimately we're going to see is an export of some of those things which have defined us as Indians to those who can learn from Native cultures themselves, who are not Indians, never will be.
And so it is that now, when Abe Conklin dances, certain non-Indians are allowed to dance with him because they are willing to learn Ponca tribal ways, and because, as Abe was taught a lifetime ago, all roads are good.